The boardroom at Voss Industries smelled of money and disappointment. My disappointment. It was an odor I had become intimately familiar with over the past 3 decades. I sat at the far end of the long obsidian table, a solitary island, of gray wool and a sea of bespoke suits and silk blouses. My presence was a discordant note in their corporate symphony, and today was the day they had finally decided to orchestrate my removal dot at the head of the table. My sister, Serafina, presided. She was the CEO, the sun around which our family's solar system revolved. Her blonde hair was styled in a severe, elegant chignon. Her nails were a slash of blood red against the black glass of the table, and her smile was a weapon of mass destruction. To her right sat our mother, her face a carefully preserved mask of aristocratic concern. To her left, our father, a man who had long ago ceded his authority in exchange for a quiet life, fidgeted with his cufflinks. They were the board, the jury, and today the executioners. Lyra, Serafina began, her voice the auditory equivalent of a chilled martini, smooth, sharp, and utterly unforgiving. Thank you for coming. We felt it was time for a family alignment. Family alignment was a new term. It replaced the less corporate, more emotionally honest intervention. I did not speak. I simply watched, my mind a silent, whirring machine, logging data points. Seraphine's posture, confident, predatory. My mother's expression, feigned sympathy. My father's gaze, avoidant. The conclusion was foregone, but the methodology was still worth analyzing. We're concerned about you, my mother chimed in, her voice dripping with practiced sincerity. Deeply concerned. You're 32 years old. You have a job that barely constitutes a career. You live in that tiny apartment. You show no ambition, no drive. Your father and I, your sister, we have built an empire. And you seem to have no interest in being a part of it. My job was a data entry position at a small, independent bookstore. It paid little, demanded less, and afforded me the one thing I valued above all else, anonymity. To them, it was the ultimate symbol of my failure, a testament to my baffling lack of ambition. It's not just a lack of interest. Mother, Serafina corrected, her voice cutting like a shard of ice. It's a deliberate rejection of everything this family stands for. It's an embarrassment. When our partners and clients ask what my sister does, I have to invent a more palatable story because the truth is simply too pathetic. I felt a faint, familiar tremor of anger deep within my core, but I suppressed it. Emotion was a vulnerability. Data was strength. I remained silent, my expression placid, unreadable. My stillness seemed to infuriate her more than any argument could. We have given you every opportunity. Lyra, she continued. We have offered you positions here at Voss. We have offered to fund a more respectable degree. You have refused it all. You have chosen this path of mediocrity. And we have decided that we can no longer enable it. We believe the only way for you to learn, to grow, is for you to experience true hardship. The kind of hardship that forges ambition. She leaned forward, her red nails tapping a soft, final rhythm on the gloss table. We are cutting you off, completely. The small allowance from the family trust will be terminated. Your access to the family's accounts is revoked. You are, for all intents and purposes, on your own. It is time for you to learn what it means to start from zero. Start from zero dot, the phrase echoed in the silent, vast chamber of my mind. The irony was so potent, so exquisite, it was almost painful. They looked at me and saw a blank space, a failure, a disappointment, a zero. They had no idea that for a very long, very dangerous, and very profitable period of my life, zero was the only name that mattered. They didn't know about the girl I used to be. The girl who had dropped out of MIT not because she couldn't, handle it, but because it was moving too slowly. The girl who could walk through the most secure digital firewalls in the world like they were beaded curtains. They didn't know about the legendary gray hat hacker known only as Zero, a ghost in the machine who, along with her partner Oracle, had executed the now infamous takedown of Omnicorp, a corrupt conglomerate whose crimes they had exposed by siphoning their entire data archive and delivering it to the press. They didn't know that the subsequent security consulting fees paid by grateful governments and rival corporations had been enough to set me up for life. They didn't know that my quiet, unassuming life was not a failure. It was a retirement, a deliberate, carefully constructed exile from a world of high stakes and constant paranoia. I had chosen the quiet life. I had chosen anonymity, but they, in their magnificent, arrogant blindness, had just made the decision to drag me out of it. They wanted me to start from zero. So be it. Zero was where I did my best work. I looked at my sister, at her smug, triumphant face. She thought she had just won. She thought she had finally excised the embarrassing, disappointing loose thread from the family tapestry. I understand, I said, my voice quiet, betraying nothing. I stood up. Thank you for your clarity. I walked out of the boardroom, the heavy door closing behind me with a soft, expensive sigh. I did not look back. The game was afoot, and they had just given me the opening move. My apartment was a paradox. To the casual observer, it was a Spartan, almost monkish space. A single mattress on the floor, a small functional kitchen, a single powerful laptop on a simple wooden desk. It was the apartment of a woman living on the edge of poverty. But behind the false wall in my closet, it was something else entirely. That night, I slid the panel aside. The space beyond was my true home, a Faraday cage shielded from all external signals. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of ozone and humming electronics. My rig, a custom-built server rack, a multi-monitor setup, and a series of encrypted, solid-state drives containing the tools of my former trade, my digital arsenal, the keys to any kingdom I chose. I sat down in the worn leather chair, my fingers finding their familiar place on the ergonomic keyboard. It felt like coming home. I powered on the system. The screens flickered to life, bathing the small space in a cool green glow. For 10 years, this rig had been dormant, a sleeping dragon. Now it was awaked up. My first act was to establish a secure, untraceable connection. I bounced my signal through a series of proxies, a university in Brazil, a server farm in Estonia, a defunct satellite relay over the Pacific. The process was second nature, as instinctive as breathing. Then I reached out. I opened a heavily encrypted messaging client, a piece of software I had written myself. I sent a single message to a single contact. Oracle. The reply came 7 seconds later. My old partner, Mara, was always listening. Zero. The message read, "To what do I owe the pleasure? I thought you were dead. Reports of my death were exaggerated." I typed back, "I need a favor. Anything. For you, Voss Industries," I wrote. "My family's company. They are in the final stages of a merger with a tech conglomerate called Aerodyne Global. I need everything you have on both of them. Financials, internal comms, security protocols, executive profiles. The works. That's a big ask, Zero. Family trouble? You could say that," I typed. They told me to start from zero. A long pause. Then a single line of text appeared, a digital ghost of a smile. They have no idea, do they? Give me 2 hours. While Oracle worked her magic on the public-facing data, I began my own work, the infiltration. I navigated to the public login portal for Voss Industries' corporate network. It was a standard, off-the-shelf security suite. The kind of thing a company buys when it cares more about the appearance of security than the reality of it. My sister, for all her corporate ruthlessness, was a creature of surfaces. She had never bothered to understand the machinery beneath. I didn't need to brute force the password. That was clumsy. Noisy. I had a better way in. 17 years ago, as a teenager trying to prove a point to my father, I had designed the original security architecture for the company's first internal network. And in that architecture, I had built a backdoor, a tiny hidden protocol disguised as a system diagnostic tool, a secret key that only I possessed. They had upgraded the system half a dozen times since then, bolting on new layers of security, new firewalls. But they had never rebuilt it from the foundation. They had built their new, gleaming castle on top of my old, forgotten one. And they had never changed the locks on the secret door in the basement. I opened a command. Line interface. My fingers danced across the keyboard, typing a string of archaic, long-forgotten code. I hit enter. For a moment, nothing. Then a single line of green text flashed on my screen. Access granted. Welcome home, Zero. I was in. I moved through. Their network like a phantom, my presence utterly invisible. I slipped past their new firewalls, their intrusion detection systems. They were looking for threats coming from the outside, never suspecting the real threat was already inside. Walking through the halls of the mainframe with the quiet confidence of the person who had laid the first stone, I began to pull data. Everything. Seraphine's emails. The company's real, unvarnished financial statements. And most importantly, the entire data room for the Aerodyne Global merger. It was a treasure trove of contracts, risk assessments, and due diligence. Reports. 2 hours later, just as I was finishing my exfiltration, a message from Oracle blinked into my feed. It was a massive encrypted data packet. Happy hunting, the message read. I spent the rest of the night cross-referencing the data I had stolen with the intelligence Oracle had gathered. And slowly a picture began to emerge. It was a picture of breathtaking corporate malfeasance. Serafina, and her desperate ambition to elevate the family company into the major leagues, was rushing into a deal with a predator. Aerodyne Global was not what it seemed. Their financials were a work of fiction, their profits inflated by a series of fraudulent accounting practices. They weren't merging with Voss Industries, they were gutting it. The deal was structured to allow them to acquire Voss's valuable portfolio of patents for pennies on the dollar, while saddling the newly merged entity with Aerodyne's massive hidden debt. And worse, far worse, I found a series of encrypted files buried deep in Aerodyne's R&D servers. They detailed a massive security backdoor built into their flagship software product, a backdoor their government clients did not know about. Aerodyne wasn't just a predator. They were spies. My sister, in her arrogant rush to glory, was about to unwittingly sell the family company to a fraudulent criminal enterprise. She was about to destroy everything my father and grandfather had built. She was about to commit corporate suicide. I leaned back in my chair, the first rays of dawn beginning to streak the sky outside my window. I now had the information to destroy Aerodyne Global, to expose their fraud, their espionage. And in doing so, I would save my family's company. I could be their silent, unknown savior, but where was the justice in that? Where was the poetry? They had cast me out. They had called me a disappointment. They had told me to start from zero. They had no idea that I was now in a position to reduce their entire world to the same. A new plan began to form in my mind, not just to save the company, but to take it. I would not expose Aerodyne's crimes, not yet. I would let the merger proceed. I would let my sister walk happily, proudly, into the trap they had laid for her. And then, at the moment of her greatest triumph, at the moment she believed she had secured her legacy forever, I would spring a trap of my own, one that would destroy not only Aerodyne, but my sister's career along with it, and I, Zero, would be there to pick up the pieces. All of them. Dawn in my world was not a gentle affair of pinks and golds. It was the harsh blue-white glare of a monitor illuminating the complex web of data I had woven through the night. The information I had exfiltrated from Voss Industries and Aerodyne Global was not merely a collection of secrets. It was an arsenal, and I spent the next 72 hours meticulously cataloging and weaponizing every piece of it. I worked with the methodical precision of a bomb maker. Each of Aerodyne's crimes was a component, a piece of volatile ordnance to be handled with care. The fraudulent accounting was a fragmentation grenade designed to shred investor confidence. The corporate espionage against their rivals was a smoke bomb designed to obscure and confuse. But the grand weapon, the nuclear core of my entire strategy, was the government backdoor in their software. That was a bunker buster, powerful enough to vaporize their entire enterprise and leave a crater where their reputation used to be. With Oracle's help, I began building profiles. We didn't just look at the companies, we looked at the people, the architects of the fraud. Aerodyne's CEO, a man named Marcus Thorne, was a classic narcissist, driven by an insatiable need for public adoration. His weakness was the press. The CFO, a nervous, meticulous man named Elias Vance, was the true brains behind the financial crimes. His weakness was his fear of legal exposure. He had left a careful, deliberate paper trail that exonerated himself while implicating everyone else, a trail I now possessed. I'm the lead engineer on the Backdoor project, a brilliant but morally compromised woman named Dr. Eleni Pereira. Her weakness was her pride in her work. I created a dedicated, encrypted dossier on each of them, a digital kill file primed and ready for deployment, but demolition was only half of the equation. To take control of the ruins, I needed to be more than a ghost. I needed a corporate entity, a vessel. We need a ghost ship, I typed to Oracle, a holding company, untraceable, with the teeth of a predator. I'm already on it, she replied. I have a shell in the Netherlands Antilles that's been dormant for a decade. Clean history. We can funnel it through a trust in Liechtenstein and bank it in Singapore. It'll be a ghost wrapped in a shadow. We named it Tesseract Holdings. It sounded powerful, geometric, and utterly impenetrable. Its first act was not to attack, but to invest. Aerodyne Global, for all its bluster, was a company built on a mountain of debt. I used a fraction of my own capital, the quiet, patient profits from my Omnicorp victory, to have Tesseract begin buying that debt on the secondary market. Small parcels at first, purchased through a dozen different brokers. It was a silent financial infiltration. By the time the merger with Voss was finalized, Tesseract Holdings would be one of Aerodyne's most significant creditors. A creditor they did not know existed. A knife, patiently waiting against the artery of their balance sheet, while my digital self was waging this silent, complex war. My physical self had to continue playing the part of the family disappointment. The phone calls, when they came, were a trial of my self-control. Lyra, darling, it's your mother. Her voice was a strained, tinny sound through my cheap burner phone. I was just calling to see how you are. Are you looking for work? I'm exploring my options, mother, I said, my voice a carefully constructed monotone of weary defeat. From my command center, I was in the middle of routing a multi-million-dollar debt purchase through a bank in Hong Kong. Well, don't lose hope, she said, her tone a masterclass in condescending pity. Unsure a little bookstore somewhere will be happy to have you. Your sister, just closed the Aerodyne deal. The final papers will be signed next week. She's on the cover of Forbes, a feature article. We're all so terribly proud. That's wonderful, I said, my voice flat. Please tell her I'm happy for her. The lie was so profound, so vast, it felt like a physical object. In my throat, my happiness for her was a sleeping behemoth, a logic bomb I had just finished coding, waiting silently on a secure, partitioned section of the Voss Industries main server. It was my masterpiece of malicious code. It was not a virus. A virus is messy, chaotic. This was a surgical instrument. I had disguised it as a benign data auditing script, scheduled to run automatically at 9:01 a.m. on the day the merger was to be publicly announced, the moment the stock market opened. Its function was simple and absolute. Upon execution, the script would do three things simultaneously. First, it would copy the entire contents of my kill files, the dossiers on Thorne, Vance, and Pereira, the proof of the financial fraud, and the technical specifications of the government backdoor, and send them via encrypted channels to a predetermined list of recipients. This list included the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Department of Justice, the technology editor at the Wall Street Journal, and most importantly, the procurement officers for Aerodyne's three largest government contracts. Second, it would trigger a system-wide, irreversible data purge of Aerodyne's offshore accounting servers, effectively erasing their ability to hide their crimes. They would be exposed, and their alibis would be turned to digital dust. Third, and most elegantly, the script would execute a single trade order through the now significant account of Tesseract Holdings. It would short Aerodyne stock, a massive leveraged bet that its value was about to plummet to, appropriately enough, zero. The trap was set. The digital guillotine was in place, held by the single, fraying thread of my sister's ambition, the night before the merger was finalized. Serafina hosted a lavish celebration at the family brownstone. I was not invited, but I attended nonetheless, a digital ghost at their feast of fools. I hacked into the security cameras of the house, another old backdoor I had left for myself years ago. On one of my monitors, I watched them, my family, in their moment of ultimate triumph. Serafina was radiant, a conquering queen, accepting the fawning congratulations of the city's financial elite. My mother and father were glowing with pride. They raised their champagne glasses in a toast to their brilliant, successful daughter. Their real daughter. I looked at their smiling, happy faces, at their world built on secrets and lies and dismissals. A world that was, in every meaningful way, already a memory. They were ghosts, and they just didn't know it yet. On my central monitor, a simple, elegant clock was counting down. The time until the market opened. The time until my logic bomb would execute. 12 hours, 47 minutes, and 16 seconds. I leaned back in my chair in the cool, dark silence of my exile. The countdown was a slow, steady heartbeat. The heartbeat of the new world I was about to create. A world where zero was the only number that mattered. The final hour before the market opened was a steady and controlled, silent tension. My command center was a bubble of calm in a world holding its breath. On my left monitor, a dozen financial news networks ran in silent, tiled windows. The faces of the anchors were bright with anticipation. The Voss Aerodyne merger was the only story that mattered today. It was being hailed as a visionary move, a bold new chapter in the tech industry. My sister, Serafina, was being lauded as the heiress who had finally, brilliantly, stepped out of her father's shadow. Her photograph was everywhere, a portrait of cool corporate confidence. On my right monitor, I had a direct, invisible feed of the Voss Industries primary server. I could see my logic bomb, my beautiful patient monster sleeping peacefully. It was a tiny, elegant string of code, hidden amongst millions of others, indistinguishable from any other system diagnostic. Script. It was a perfect, microscopic assassin dot, and on my central monitor, the largest of the three, was the clock. A simple, brutal, digital countdown, 0 hours, 5 minutes, and 12 seconds. I did not feel nervous. I did not feel triumphant. I felt a profound and unsettling sense of clarity. I was an astrophysicist about to witness a supernova I had predicted, a collision of massive, arrogant bodies that would result in a spectacular, inevitable explosion. I was not a participant. I was an observer, the analyst who had run the numbers and was now simply waiting for the data to prove her hypothesis. Correct. 0 hours, 1 minute, and 0 seconds. I placed my fingers on my keyboard, not to type, just to feel the cool, solid reality of the instrument of my will beneath. My hands.00:00:10. I watched the pre-market trading data. Aerodyne stock was already soaring, buoyed by the hype. Voss Industries was enjoying a similar, smaller surge. A final, beautiful inflation of the bubble, just before the pinprick .00:00:03.2.1. The market opened. The bell chimed. On a dozen silent news feeds. And at precisely 9 hours, 0 minutes, and 1 second a.m., my logic bomb awoke. The execution was not a chaotic explosion. It was a silent, instantaneous, and perfectly sequenced cascade of pure information. A digital blitzkrieg. I watched the confirmation logs scroll across my screen in a blur of green. Affirmative text dot at 9 hours, 0 minutes, 1 second, and 37 milliseconds, the first data packet launched. My kill file on Marcus Thorne, Aerodyne's CEO, was delivered to the inbox of the technology editor at the Wall Street Journal. At 9 hours, 0 minutes, 1 second, and 42 milliseconds, the dossier on Elias Vance and the fraudulent accounting was delivered to the Enforcement Division of the SEC. At 9 hours, 0 minutes, 1 second, and 49 milliseconds, the complete technical specifications and proof of the government backdoor were delivered to the heads of procurement at the Pentagon, the NSA, and the Department of Homeland Security. A dozen other packets containing evidence of corporate espionage and insider trading were delivered to a dozen other interested parties. The seeds of chaos had been sown. At 9 hours, 0 minutes, 2 seconds, and 11 milliseconds, the second phase executed. The script sent a single encrypted command to the offshore data havens where Aerodyne kept its real, incriminating financial records. The command was simple: purge. I watched through my own backdoor. Into their servers as terabytes of data, years of carefully constructed lies and criminal records were irreversibly wiped. Their alibis were turning to digital dust at 9 hours, 0 minutes, 2 seconds, and 84 milliseconds, the third and final phase executed. A trade order originating from Tesseract Holdings was placed. It was a massive, levered short sell against Aerodyne Global, a bet of nearly $500 million that the company's stock was about to become worthless. The entire operation, from start to finish, had taken less than 3 seconds. For the next 10 minutes, nothing happened. The world continued to operate on a human timescale, blissfully unaware of the digital tsunami that was already racing towards the shore. Aerodyne's stock continued to climb. On the news, analysts were praising the merger, praising my sister's genius, and then the first sign. At 9:11 a.m., the ticker for Aerodyne Global, ticker symbol AGL, froze. A small red H appeared beside it, halted. Trading was halted pending news. The news came at 9:14 a.m. It wasn't a press release. It was a single, explosive headline. From the Wall Street Journal, published by Ms. Renault, Aerodyne Global, CEO Marcus Thorne, accused of massive financial fraud, government contracts in jeopardy amidst espionage allegations. Multi-billion-dollar merger with Voss Industries now in question. The dam had broken. I watched as every other news network picked up the story. I hacked into the internal communications at Voss Industries, a trivial matter now that their digital world was in chaos. I saw the flood of panicked emails. I saw my sister's schedule, a string of triumphant meetings and interviews, being deleted and replaced with a single repeating entry. Crisis management. I accessed the webcam. On Seraphine's computer. It felt like a violation that I had long ago abandoned such moral considerations. This was data gathering. She was in her magnificent office, the one that was supposed to be the seat of her new larger empire. She was not the cool, confident CEO from the magazine covers. She was a storm of panic, shouting into her phone, her face pale, her perfect hair coming undone. My father and mother were there with her, their faces masks of sheer, uncomprehending terror. They were watching their world burn down on live television. At 10:30 a.m. The SEC officially announced a full investigation into Aerodyne Global. At 11 a.m., the Pentagon released a statement that all contracts with Aerodyne were being suspended indefinitely, pending a security review. When the market regulators finally allowed AGL to resume trading in the afternoon, it was not a stock. It was a falling knife. In 17 minutes of frantic, panicked selling, Aerodyne Global lost 98% of its value. A $40 billion company was reduced to rubble. Voss Industries, tethered to the corpse of its new partner, was dragged down with it. Their stock crashed by 70%. My sister's visionary deal, her crowning achievement, had become a catastrophic company-killing liability. The dynasty was on the brink of ruin, and all the while, my own quiet, invisible company, Tesseract Holdings, was reaping a fortune. The short sell was a masterstroke, a trade that would be talked about on Wall Street for decades. We had not just made money, we had made a legend. The day after the collapse, the world was still reeling. Serafina, in a brief, humiliating press conference, announced her immediate resignation as CEO of Voss Industries. The company was in freefall, legally and financially crippled by its association with the greatest corporate scandal of the decade. I sat in my command center, the cool, quiet heart of the hurricane I had created. On one of my screens, I had a chart displaying the smoldering ruins of the Voss and Aerodyne stock tickers. On another, I had the balance of the Tesseract Holdings primary bank account. The number was so large it seemed unreal, a string of commas and zeros that represented the distilled essence of my revenge. A message from Oracle appeared on my secure client. The world is on fire. They are calling it the Aerodyne implosion. No one has any idea how it happened. It's a complete mystery. Beautiful work, Zero. So what's the plan? I looked at the two screens. The destruction and the profit. An equation that was still unbalanced. The final step was yet to be taken. I opened a new, secure document. I began to draft a proposal. A legal, formal, and utterly merciless document. It was a hostile takeover bid. Tesseract Holdings, my ghost ship, now flush with more cash than God, was making a formal offer to acquire a controlling interest in the crippled, undervalued, and leaderless Voss Industries. For pennies on the dollar, I typed the final line and stared at it. My revenge was not just to tear them down. It was to rebuild their world in my own image, to take the thing they had tried to deny me, the thing they had so carelessly broken, and to make it mine. My family told me to start from zero. It seemed only fair that they should get the same opportunity. Chaos is a ladder. It is also a smokescreen and a tool of leverage. In the week following the Aerodyne implosion, the world saw only chaos. They saw a fallen titan, a disgraced CEO, and a venerable family company, Voss Industries, caught in the blast radius, its value and reputation vaporized in a single cataclysmic trading day. But I, from the quiet, cold heart of my command center, saw something different. I saw a perfect, once-in-a-lifetime buying opportunity. The world was scrambling to understand what had happened. The SEC was launching its largest investigation in a decade. The press was in a feeding frenzy, publishing lurid retrospectives on Erdine's fraud. My sister, Serafina, had vanished from public life, a corporate pariah in self-imposed exile. And the board of Voss Industries was trapped in a state of pure, undiluted panic. I watched them, of course. The back door into their network was still my private, invisible window into their collapsing world. I watched their emergency board meetings. They were no longer the smug, confident arbiters of my fate. They were terrified men, adrift in a sea of red ink, watching their life's work and their personal fortunes evaporate. My father was there, a ghost at the table, his face a gray, slack mask of shock. He had aged 10 years in a week. They were facing a tidal wave of shareholder lawsuits. They were in breach of contract with dozens of clients. Their credit lines were frozen. Bankruptcy was not a possibility. It was an inevitability, a black hole pulling them in with relentless gravitational force. They needed a savior. They needed a miracle. And I was prepared to offer them one. For a price, the offer arrived on a Monday morning. It was delivered not by email, but by a team of stone-faced lawyers from a top-tier international firm. The offer was from a company they had never heard of, Tesseract Holdings. I watched through the boardroom webcam as my father read the terms aloud, his voice trembling. The offer from this mysterious, unknown entity was as brutal as it was simple. Tesseract would assume all of Voss Industries' outstanding debt. It would inject enough capital to stave off bankruptcy and settle the most pressing lawsuits. It would, in effect, save the company. In exchange, Tesseract would acquire a 90% controlling stake for a price so low it was little more than a symbolic gesture. It was not an acquisition. It was an unconditional surrender. Who are these people? One of the board members, a man named Henderson, asked, his voice shaking with a mixture of hope and fear. They're vultures, my father whispered, his eyes scanning the document. They're picking the meat from the bones. They're the only offer we have, Alistair, Henderson shot back. It's either this, or we are wiped out completely. Everything, gone. They debated for 3 agonizing hours. Their pride, the legendary pride of the Voss family, warred with the stark, brutal reality of their own extinction. But in the end, there was no choice. To accept the offer was to accept humiliation. To reject it was to accept annihilation. They chose humiliation. Their lawyers sent back a formal acceptance, along with a request for an immediate, in-person meeting with the principals of Tesseract Holdings. They wanted to look their conqueror in the eye. My lawyers replied on my behalf. The meeting is confirmed. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. The location will be your own boardroom. I wanted it to be there, in that room. The scene of my final judgment, the place where they had cast me out. It was a matter of symmetry, of poetry. The next morning, I did not dress as Zero, the ghost in the machine. Nor did I dress as Lyra, the quiet, disappointing date entry clerk. I created a third persona. A new woman, forged in the fires of my revenge and funded by the profits of their destruction. I wore a suit. Not a stuffy corporate uniform, but a bespoke creation of dark gray wool, tailored to fit me like a second skin. It was sharp, severe, and utterly uncompromising. My hair was not in a simple ponytail, but pulled back in a sleek, intricate knot that was both elegant and severe. I wore heels that were not practical, but architectural, adding 2 inches of height and a sound like cracking ice with every step I took on the polished marble floors. I was no longer the family's dirty little secret. I was the CEO, and I was about to attend my first board meeting. I arrived at Voss Tower at 9:55 a.m. The receptionist in the lobby, a woman who had never once met my eyes in a decade, stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, A flicker of confused recognition in her eyes. I did not acknowledge her. I walked directly to the private executive elevator, which opened for me with a quiet chime. My real access, had already been restored. The entire executive floor was silent, a ghost town. I walked down the long, carpeted hall to the boardroom. The door was closed. I could feel the tense, terrified energy emanating from within. I paused outside, taking a single deep, cleansing breath. The analyst in my mind was running final projections, but this was no longer about data. This was about power. This was the final satisfying keystroke of my grand, beautiful hack. I pushed the door open and walked in. The 5 of them were there. The remaining board members, their faces gray with anxiety, and my father sitting in the CEO's chair. His chair for the last time. They were all looking towards the door, expecting to see a team of ruthless, middle-aged men in suits. They saw me. The silence that fell was not the quiet, stunned silence of my takeover phone call. It was a loud, violent silence, filled with the sound of 5 different realities shattering at once. I saw the confusion on their faces, a cascade of malfunctioning recognition. They knew who I was, but they could not reconcile the woman. Standing before them, this cold, powerful, immaculately dressed stranger with the quiet, disappointing daughter they had so casually discarded. My father was the first to speak. His voice was a choked, strangled whisper. Lyra, what? What are you doing here? This is a private meeting. Yes, it is, I said, my voice calm and clear, echoing slightly in the stunned room. I walked towards the table, my heels clicking a slow, deliberate rhythm on the floor. It is a meeting for the principals of Tesseract Holdings, and I am the sole principal. I placed my slim leather briefcase on the table and opened it. I took out a single beautifully printed document. The finalized acquisition agreement. Henderson, the most pragmatic of the board members, finally found his voice. This is impossible. This is a joke. I assure you, Mr. Henderson, I am not joking, I replied, my gaze sweeping across their shattered faces. The funds used by Tesseract to acquire Aerodyne's debt, the capital used to short their stock, and the money now being used to save this company from the ruin my sister brought upon it. It is all mine. I looked at my father then, at his face, which was now a landscape of pure, uncomprehending horror. He was looking at me, but he was seeing a monster, a ghost. The quiet, invisible daughter who had somehow, impossibly, become the most powerful person in the room. How? He whispered, the word barely audible. You told me to start from 0, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. I took your advice. You just didn't realize that I had a different understanding of what that word meant. I slid the acquisition papers across the table towards him. The terms are not negotiable. You will sign. You will cede 90% of this company to me. You will all tender your resignations from the board, effective immediately. You, father, will be allowed to keep your original 10% stake, a small pension for your retirement. A courtesy. I was not gloating. I was not angry. I was simply stating facts. The cold, hard, and inescapable reality of their new world. They had held an assessment and found me wanting. I had held my own assessment and found them to be a non-performing asset, a liability that needed to be aggressively restructured. I walked to the head of the table. My father, looking like a hollowed-out shell, slowly, numbly, rose from the CEO's chair, my chair. I did not sit down. I simply stood behind it, my hands resting on its back. I looked at the broken men before me, my former family, my new employees. Welcome, I said to the silent, terrified room, to the first official board meeting of the new Voss Industries. The silence in the boardroom was a brittle, fragile thing stretched to its breaking point. It was the silence of a vacuum, the void left behind after all hope, all power, and all understanding had been sucked out of the room. My father stood, swaying slightly, looking at the CEO's chair I now stood behind. It was his throne, but he was an abdicated king, a ghost in his own court. The first order of business, I said, my voice cutting through the stillness, is to accept the resignations of this board. I looked at each of them in turn, my gaze lingering for a moment on each face. Your severance packages will be standard, provided you sign the non-disclosure agreements my legal team is drafting as we speak. Should any of you feel the need to contest this transition, you will find that Tesseract Holdings has retained the most aggressive and expensive corporate litigation firm in the country. I assure you, it is a war you cannot afford to fight. I then turned my gaze to my father. As for you, father, I said, the word feeling strange and foreign in my mouth, your 10% stake in the old company will be honored. It will be converted to a new class of non-voting minority shares in the restructured entity. Consider it a pension. It is the last and only benefit you will receive from this company. You will have no title, no office, no influence. You are, for all intents and purposes, retired. Effective immediately, he did not protest. He simply nodded, a slow, jerky movement of a man whose strings had been cut. The patriarch of the Voss family had just been put on an allowance by the daughter he had disowned. The symmetry was devastating. A courier will be here within the hour with the necessary documents, I concluded. Sign them, then go home. This meeting is over. They shuffled out of the room like old men, their suits suddenly seeming too large for their diminished frames. They were the ghosts of the old regime, and I had just exorcised them. The moment the door closed, my work began. I did not sit. I walked to the head of the table and activated the integrated communications panel. Get me David Chun in IT and Maria Flores in building security. I commanded the operator. They were patched through in seconds, their voices a mixture of confusion and terror. They had heard the rumors that were now surely ripping through the building, but they did not yet know the truth. Mr. Chen, Ms. Flores, this is Lyra, the new Chief Executive Officer of Voss Industries, I said. The name felt alien, but the title felt like a perfectly tailored suit. You will receive official confirmation of my position momentarily. I have 2 directives for you. Ms. Flores, I want the locks and keycard access for the entire executive floor changed within the hour. Issue new credentials only on my direct written authority. Is that clear? Yes. Ma'am, she stammered. Mr. Chun, I continued. My voice sharp, precise. I want a full network lockdown. Isolate all systems that were interfaced with Aerodyne Global during the merger negotiations. I want a complete diagnostic of our server integrity and a full, unabridged copy of all access logs for the past 6 months delivered to my personal, encrypted server. The address is being sent to you now. Then I want you to conduct a full, deep dive security sweep for any and all unauthorized backdoors or monitoring software on our network. I want my company clean. A full sweep could take days, ma'am, he protested weakly. Then you and your team will not be sleeping. For days, Mr. Chun, I replied, my voice leaving no room for argument. Begin immediately, I cut the connection. My next directive was to the entire company. I scheduled an all-hands meeting for 1 hour later in the central atrium. It was time to meet my new subjects. The atrium was a vast 4-story space of glass and steel designed to impress visitors and intimidate employees. As I stood on the small podium, looking down at the hundreds of faces looking up at me, I could feel the raw, palpable fear in the air. They were terrified. They had just watched their entire leadership structure be decapitated in a single morning. They were expecting a corporate raider, a butcher. They were expecting mass firings, a gutting of the company they had given their lives to. I leaned into the microphone. Good afternoon, I began. My quiet voice was a stark contrast to the booming, charismatic speeches they were used to from Serafina. My name is Lyra, as of 10 a.m. this morning. I am the new owner and CEO of this company. A wave of nervous murmurs washed over the crowd. I know what you are thinking, I said, my voice steady. You are wondering who I am, and you are wondering if you still have a job. Let me be direct. Who I am is less important than what I am. I am a technician, an engineer, and I am here to fix this company. I gestured to the vast, beautiful building around us. The previous leadership made a series of catastrophic errors. They were seduced by the illusion of a glamorous merger, and in their ambition, they forgot what this company actually does. They forgot what this company was built on. My gaze swept over the crowd, past the nervous-looking sales and marketing teams, and settled on the anxious faces of the engineers and developers in the back. The people I knew Serafina had ignored and undervalued. The people who, like me, were seen as the back-end stuff. This company was built on a foundation of brilliant, innovative engineering, I said, my voice rising with a new, firm authority. But somewhere along the way, we forgot that we became a marketing company that happened to have a tech department. We started selling promises instead of products. That era ends today. Effective immediately, we are entering a 180-day operational freeze on all new product launches and marketing initiatives. All resources, all personnel, and all of our focus will be diverted to a single objective: to fix, secure, and perfect our core technology. We will rebuild our foundation. We will regain the trust of our clients, not with clever slogans, but with flawless, reliable, and superior engineering. I looked directly at the engineering department. Your team is now the most important team in this company. You will have every resource you need. You will answer directly to me, and you will help me save this company. A new kind of murmur went through the crowd. It was not fear. It was a hesitant, dawning flicker of hope. I had not offered them an inspiring speech. I had offered them a logical, credible plan. And more importantly, I had offered them respect. This will be a difficult period, I concluded. But at the end of it, we will emerge as a stronger, better, and more honest company. Now I suggest you all get back to work. We have a great deal to do. That night, I did not go back to my small apartment. I went to the brownstone, the place I now owned. My father and mother were waiting for me in the living room, surrounded by the ghosts of their former life. The air was thick with the bitter scent of defeat. Lyra, my mother began, her voice trembling, her face a mask of wounded disbelief. How could you do this? To your father? To your sister? To this family? The word family hung in the air, a hollow, meaningless sound. I looked at them, at these two people who had created me and then cast me aside, and the dam of my carefully constructed control finally broke. A flash of raw, cold emotion, the anger I had suppressed for a lifetime, rose to the surface. Family? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. You want to talk about family? Let us talk about family. A family is supposed to be a support structure, a foundation of unconditional love. But that is not what this family was. This family was a corporation, a hierarchy, and I was its lowest performing, most disappointing asset. I took a step towards them. You held an assessment and you voted me out. You cut me off. You told me to start from zero. You did not do it to motivate me. You did it to punish me for not being a reflection of your own narrow, pathetic ambitions. You don't get to stand in my house and lecture me on the meaning of family. This is your father's home. My mother cried. No, I replied, my voice like ice. This is a property title to which is held by Tesseract Holdings, of which I am the sole owner. It is my home, and you are living in it at my discretion. just as I was once living my life at your discretion. I walked to the fireplace and turned to face them. The final assessment. I have liquidated your stock options and your executive pensions to cover the company's immediate legal fees. What remains of your personal wealth is yours. I will also continue to pay the property taxes and upkeep on this house. You may continue to live here for now. Consider it a stipend, the kind you once so generously provided for me. That is the new arrangement. That is the new shape of this family. They stared at me, speechless. They were finally seeing me, not the quiet daughter, not the disappointment. They were seeing zero. You have made your point, Lyra, my father finally whispered, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. No, father, I replied, turning my back on them. I have not made a point. I have taken control. There is a difference. I walked out of the room, leaving them in the silent, gilded cage they had built for themselves. The emotional confrontation was over. The debt of my disappointment had been repaid in full. I went to the library, the quietest room in the house, and opened my laptop. The network diagnostics from my new company were waiting for me. The systems were a mess. The challenges were immense. But looking at the screen, at the complex problems waiting to be solved, I felt a profound sense of peace. The demolition was complete. The site was cleared. It was time to start. Building that victory, I discovered, was not an event. It was a new and profoundly exhausting state of being. The war of acquisition had been a clean, elegant affair of data and logic. The peace that followed was a messy, complex, and deeply human quagmire. I had conquered the kingdom. Now I had to govern it. And it was a kingdom in ruins. The first few weeks of my tenure as CEO were an exercise in triage. Voss Industries was not just a company with a tarnished reputation. It was a body suffering from systemic rot. Seraphine's leadership had been a glittering facade, a beautiful marble edifice built on a foundation of crumbling, neglected concrete. She had prized the marketing department above all else, starving the engineering and R&D divisions of resources. The result was a sales team that had been trained to sell a fantasy, and an engineering team that was exhausted from trying to patch the ever-widening cracks in reality. My days were a relentless series of meetings, each one revealing a new layer of decay. The sales team, stripped of their charismatic leader and their arsenal of empty promises, was adrift and demoralized. The finance department was a labyrinth of convoluted, inefficient processes designed to obscure rather than illuminate the company's true financial state. And the engineers, the heart of the company, were a mixture of hope and deep-seated burnout. They had been ignored, belittled, and overworked for years. They looked at me not as a savior, but as one more in a long line of managers who would not understand their work. My leadership style was a shock to their system. I did not give speeches about synergy or growth. I implemented systems. I created transparent, public-facing project roadmaps so that every employee could see what we were working on and why. I instituted a policy of radical honesty with our remaining clients, admitting our product's flaws and giving them a clear, credible timeline for the fixes. I tore down the walls between departments, forcing the sales team to sit in on engineering meetings to learn the language of the product they were actually selling. I was not a charismatic leader. I was an architect, reinforcing the foundations, rebuilding the load-bearing walls, and installing a new, ruthlessly logical operating system. The ghosts of the old regime, however, were not so easily banished. My parents had retreated into a state of quiet, wounded shock, living as silent tenants in the grand brownstone that now belonged to me. But Serafina was not the type to go quietly into the night. She appeared at my office one month into my tenure. She had no appointment, She simply swept past the startled receptionist, a phantom of her former self. She was still beautiful, but the polished, confident veneer was gone. Her eyes were hard, her glamour replaced by a brittle, venomous anger. "You look comfortable," she spat, her gaze sweeping over my stark, functional office, sitting in my chair. "In my company." "It was never your company, Serafina," I replied calmly, not looking up from the code I was reviewing on my monitor. "It was our family's, and you were driving it off a cliff." "I was building an empire," she hissed. "And you, in your pathetic, jealous little rage, tore it all down. You couldn't stand to see me succeed." I finally looked up at her. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old familial pain, the sting of a lifetime of her casual cruelty. But it was quickly replaced by the cold, dispassionate analysis of a CEO dealing with a non-performing asset: success. I asked, my voice flat. I swiveled my monitor to face her. On the screen was the forensic audit of her tenure. A litany of reckless gambles, of ignored warnings from the engineering team, of resources funneled into marketing for products that were years away from being viable. You weren't building an empire, Serafina. You were a gambler on a winning streak, betting the entire company on every hand. The Aerodyne deal wasn't your masterpiece. It was just the iceberg you happened to hit before you sank the ship all on your own. Your own internal projections showed a 70% chance of insolvency within 3 years, even without the merger. You weren't a visionary. You were just a very, very lucky amateur, and your luck ran out. She stared at the screen, at the undeniable, mathematical proof of her own incompetence. The anger in her face slowly curdled into a look of profound, ugly hatred. "What do you want from me?" She whispered. "Want?" I asked. "I don't want anything from you." "You have nothing I could possibly want." "My severance," she said, her voice trembling. "My payout. I'm entitled to it." "You are entitled to nothing," I replied, my voice like ice. "Your contract as CEO contained a standard malfeasance clause. Given that your gross negligence nearly bankrupted the company, I could, in fact, sue you personally for damages. But I won't. My offer is this. You will walk out of this office, you will disappear from my life and from the orbit of this company, and in return I will not pursue a legal course of action. That is the only deal you are going to get." She looked at me, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. She knew she was beaten. She turned and stormed out of the office, a queen with no kingdom, no power, and no future. The last ghost of the old regime had been EXORCICD. With the family drama finally cauterized, my entire focus shifted to the work. The 180-day operational freeze was a period of intense focus creation. In the engineering department, which I had moved to the now vacant executive floor, a new culture began to bloom. I had given them a clear mission, the resources, to achieve it, and the one thing they had been starved of for years: respect. The first victory was a small, internal one, but it was a turning point. For years, a critical bug in the core of our software had caused intermittent data corruption for our largest clients. Seraphine's solution had been to offer discounts and apologies. The engineers had known how to fix it, but it required a full system overhaul, a project Serafina had never been willing to fund. I made it our first priority. After 6 straight weeks of work, my team, led by a brilliant senior engineer named Ben, found the solution. I was in the lab with them at 3 a.m. when they ran the final diagnostic. The code was clean, the bug was dead. A quiet, exhausted cheer went through the room. It was the sound of morale being rebuilt, one line of code at a time. It was the sound of my company beginning to heal, but the world outside did not wait for us to heal. As Voss Industries had gone dark, a void had been created in the market, and our competitors, smelling blood in the water, had begun to move in. A rival firm, a company called Innovate Dynamics, launched a new product that was a direct, if inferior, copy of our own. They began an aggressive marketing campaign targeting our old client lists, promising stability and a bright new future. The news sent a wave of fresh anxiety through the company. The sales team, in particular, was panicked. They urged me to rush a new version of our own software to market to fight back. I called Oracle. Her intelligence on Innovate Dynamics was swift and comprehensive. They were well funded, but their technology was weak. They rushed their product to market, and it was riddled with its own security flaws. That afternoon, I called another all-hands meeting. The mood was tense, the employees fearful that we were about to be rendered obsolete before we had even recovered. I know you have all seen the news about Innovate Dynamics. I began, my voice calm and steady. I know you are concerned, and you should be. They are a threat, but they are a threat we will not be addressing in the way you expect. I looked out at the sea of anxious faces. We will not rush our product. We will not engage in a price war. We will not be distracted from our mission. The plan I laid out 6 weeks ago has not changed. I paused, letting the weight of my decision settle, but our objective has. Our original goal was to fix what was broken, to restore Voss Industries to its former glory. That is no longer enough. Merely competing with a company like Innovate Dynamics is a losing game. We must make them irrelevant. I brought up a new image on the large screen behind me. It was a complex architectural diagram, a vision of a completely new platform I had been quietly designing in my spare moments. A next-generation system. That was a quantum leap beyond our current technology and light years ahead of our new competitor. We are not just going to renovate this house, I announced, my voice ringing with a new, fierce energy. We are going to tear it down to the studs and build a skyscraper in its place. This is the future of this company. It is a gamble. It will require all of our focus, all of our brilliance, and all of our courage. I am asking you to trust me, to ignore the noise from the outside world, and to help me build the future. I looked into the eyes of my engineers. I saw their fear, but I also saw a spark of exhilaration. The fear of a difficult challenge and the thrill of a worthy one. The reconstruction was over. The revolution had just begun.